Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Dr. John Abramson, MD. Dr. John Abramson is the author of several books, including Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Repair It. And welcome, Dr. Abramson.
Well, thank you for having me, Catherine. It's a pleasure.
So, Dr. Abramson, do you have a website that you can share for our audience?
I don't. I have not gone into social media. I miss that phase, and I enjoy spending my time looking at the issues that are coming out and evolving. And I depend on people like you to get the message out.
All right. So I just wanted to point that out for our audience. So if you want to understand more about Dr. Abramson and his wonderful work, you're going to need to read his books, including the one that we're going to talk about today, Sickening. So Dr. John Abramson, medical doctor, can you please explain for our audience your personal credentials?
Sure. I graduated from Harvard College in 1970. Went to Dartmouth and Brown medical schools, did a residency in family medicine. After doing a residency, I did a 2-year research fellowship, Johnson Foundation fellowship, and was trained to be an academic researcher. But I decided that my real calling was to go out and take care of people as a family doctor. So I did that. I opened a practice about an hour north of Boston, Massachusetts, and practiced family medicine for 20 years there. I enjoyed it tremendously. I was a typical family doc. I was making house calls and seeing people and going to the emergency room at night, all the things that family doctors do. And I had other interests. I was also teaching taught Harvard medical students for about 25 years. I became chair of family medicine at Leahy Clinic in Burlington, Massachusetts. And I taught a course at Harvard Medical School called Healing and Spirituality, which I found tremendously gratifying. The idea being that the deeper the doctor-patient relationship is, one human being to another, the more effective the healing process is going to be. But as the 1990s wore on, I went into practice in 1982. As the 1990s wore on, it became clear to me that the drug companies were having increasing influence in medical journals and on the guidelines that doctors have to follow. And my research fellowship, which had been done almost 20 years earlier, provided me with the skills to do analyses of these situations that most docs couldn't do. And then in 2001, a drug called Vioxx was a best-selling drug in the United States. It was an arthritis drug that supposedly had the advantage of being gentler on the stomach. And it was the most heavily marketed drug in the United States and a bestseller for sure. When the FDA met to consider the benefits and harms of Vioxx, they presented the data that Merck had submitted to the FDA to the FDA Advisory Committee. And the FDA Advisory Committee posted that data that the manufacturer of Vioxx had submitted. They posted that data on the FDA website, and there was a reference to that website in a journal article upstream. And what I found is that Vioxx not only was a safer drug, but it was a deadly drug. And not only was it a deadly drug, but the New England Journal and the FDA both knew that the information that was going out to doctors and patients was wrong. and that instead of being a safer drug, that was its only advantage, it wasn't more effective. 1 out of 40 people who took Vioxx instead of an over-the-counter anti-inflammatory drug, which is just as effective, 1 out of 40 people had a serious medical adverse reaction, like serious enough to land them in the hospital. And yet Merck was advertising this drug most heavily in the United States. The New England Journal knew what was going on and didn't stop selling its reprints to Merck for Merck drug salesmen to hand out to doctors to convince doctors that it was a good drug because the New England Journal said it was a good drug. And I realized that the train had gone off the rails. And I, for whatever reason, I had found out what was going on and decided that I could no longer, in good faith, be a family doctor community when I understood that tens of thousands of people's lives were at risk. And in fact, about 50,000 Americans died from taking Vioxx for no advantage. I left practice in 2001 when I figured this out to write a book about the drug industry. I just felt that it was immoral of me to continue to take care of patients one-on-one when I understood the magnitude of the harm that was being done. I left practice, wrote this book. It came out in 2004. And a week after it came out, Vioxx was pulled from the market. It had little to do with me. I clearly put Merck on notice that this critical discussion would go on. But a second study came out that showed again that Vioxx doubled the risk of heart attacks. And I left. I had written the most recent book. It came out in September of 2004 when Vioxx got pulled from the market. And I immediately got catapulted from being a family doc to being in the national limelight. And I was on the Today Show twice and did maybe 80 or 100 national TV interviews. Things went wrong with drugs. I got called to be the expert. Then the lawyers who were doing the national drug litigation in the United States saw me on TV, realized that I could speak English and I understood a little bit about science. And they started to ask me to be an expert in the civil litigation in the United States. So, for example, there were 27,000 Americans who sued Merck because of being harmed, allegedly being harmed by Vioxx. And those 27,000 cases used the same set of experts. So when I testified as an expert, wrote a report and testified as an expert, it would be, my contribution would be available to all 27,000 cases. And in that role as an expert in litigation, I got to see the actual computer hard drives, the drug company's computer hard drives. I got to see data. I got to see the marketing plans. I got to see the discussions between the marketing plans and the sales executives and the real executives. And I could piece together what was going on. This was an enormously privileged position. I can't tell tales out of school. So most of what I know remains sealed, and I am bound by a confidentiality agreement. But two things. One is I could take what I knew and share it with the FBI and the Department of Justice in the United States. And I did that in one case that involved a drug that Pfizer made that was a cousin of Bextra. And that led to the largest criminal fine in US history in 2009. $1.195 billion Pfizer was fined. And the other thing I did was, after I had been an expert in litigation and spent about 12 years, literally 7 days a week, full time, analyzing the corporate hard drives to see what they had truly done, and nothing was changing. Billions of dollars were changing hands, but doctors weren't understanding how much they were being misled purposely by the drug companies. I decided to stop doing the litigation and started to write another book. And that book, which really tells what's happening in the drug industry, how American doctors are being misled and American patients are being misled directly by the drug companies and indirectly by their doctors to rely on expensive new medicines when often other approaches, even non-pharmacological approaches that you talk about, are more effective than the expensive drugs. So I wrote that book. It came out in 2022, and it's called Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Repair it.
Thank you for everything you are contributing to the planet. Now, Dr. John Abramson, here at the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio, we have a global audience of 46,000 listeners every week on every major podcast platform all over the world. What would you like people all over the world to understand about drug companies?
So this is a critically important question. And we can go down in the weeds anytime you want me to go down in the weeds. I'm happy to go there. That's where I spent most of the last 20 years. But the key issue is understood very well by the Nobel Prize Committee, who just awarded the Nobel Prize to three economists whose work shows that when institutions in a country don't serve the public interest, that country doesn't develop and the people suffer. And what's happening now, especially in the United States, but in the UK and all the developed countries, what's happening now is that the drug industry has become what the Nobel Prize Committee terms an extractive industry. They don't address the drug company. I'm applying what the Nobel Prize Committee is saying to the drug company, because I'm a little less polite than the Nobel Prize winners and then the Nobel Prize Committee. And I think that if we're going to understand this, if your listener is going to understand how to protect themselves from the bias that's introduced by the drug companies, they've got to understand, we've got to name names. We've got to explain to them why their doctors believe that almost all of their health is determined by what drugs and medical care they're getting, instead of how they're living their lives and their socioeconomic status and their health behaviors. So the message that I want to get across is that we have a structural problem that is worst in the United States, but exists to a large degree in other developed nations. And that structural problem is that the drug industry and other medical industries' primary purpose, to which they take very seriously, is to make as much profit as they can and deliver that profit to their shareholders. And the guardrails that we citizens expect to be in place so that the ordinary people and the ordinary doctors in each country can understand how best to promote their patients and their fellow countrymen's well-being. That doesn't exist. And the docs are being fooled. They think that they're practicing evidence-based medicine. That's the catchword in the United States. You got to practice evidence-based medicine, which reflects the findings that are in the journal and the guidelines. And that evidence-based medicine is manufactured by the drug companies for the sole primary purpose of maximizing their profits. That's what I want people to understand. And we can take any of the big issues, statins or any of the big issues, and go down into the weeds and look how it happens. But the overwhelming message is that 80% of your health is in your own hands. Some people are trapped in unfortunate socioeconomic situations, and they can't, the responsibility is not on their shoulders. The responsibility is on society's shoulders. But for those of us who are fortunate enough not to be trapped in an underdog position in society, 80% of our health is determined by how we live our lives. And this sales job that's being done by the profiteering companies convinces people and their doctors that the best way for them to be healthy is to take the newest drugs instead of taking responsibility for how they live their lives. So I think the biggest contribution I can make is, folks, get back to basics. You can't beat basics. Now, I've had plenty of serious medical problems in my life, and I'm very fortunate. I've had good medical care, and I wouldn't be alive but for that medical care. So I am not saying turn away from all medical care. But what I am saying is, number one, take responsibility for your own health. Do what you can do. Exercise. Don't drink in excess. Don't practice unsafe sex. Don't smoke. Um, Eat a healthy diet. All the things that we know that explains 80% of our health. And then for the other 20% where we need medical care, we've got to have open discussions with our doctors. And that's why I wrote Sickening, to inform patients about how to talk to doctors and to inform doctors how to talk to patients. So if you do buy my book, I hope you do, because the details are going to blow your mind how abjectively immoral the drug companies can be, and how much their executives frequently deserve to be in jail instead of receiving multi-million-dollar bonuses and stock options. So just please take responsibility for your own health. And when you do need health care, be open with your doctor, try to engage your doctor in a frank conversation. And if you can't engage your doctor in a frank conversation, if your doctor is too defensive about what they think they know, then it may be time for a new doctor.
Thank you. And at this time, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. We're listening to Dr. John Abramson talk about his book, Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Repair It. We'll be right back. Dr. John Abramson, here at the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I dedicate this show to educating people about how we can heal ourselves naturally without drugs. And yet there are times when medications are necessary. So for example, about a year ago, I drove one of my best friends to the emergency room while he was having a massive heart attack. When he got to the emergency room, his blood pressure was 230. Subsequently, he had open heart surgery. So there is no doubt that medications and surgery actually saved his life. And he was a regular exerciser, also a good friend of mine. So I've helped him before and since. I remember telling him, don't exercise. And he actually listened to me. But so now he's actually doing great. So big picture, there are times when we need to go to the doctor and when we absolutely have to take medications. When people absolutely have to take medications, how can they ensure they're taking medications that will actually help them?
Well, that's a hard question, because the first response is that virtually all of the studies of new medications are done by the manufacturers of those drugs, who stand to profit financially if they convince doctors to prescribe those drugs for their patients. So it's a little bit hard when the regulatory authorities in the UK or the US decide whether or not they're going to approve a new medication and for what they're going to approve it. They have to rely on the studies that the drug companies have supplied to them. Now, that said, there's a whole lot of information in drug labels in the US and the UK and in other countries. There's a whole lot of information. And you'll see in my, I'm sorry for the shameless plug, but you'll see in Sickening how to look at those drug labels and to see whether the studies that have been done, submitted to the authorities, actually show these drugs are an improvement over older drugs. It turns out that only about 25% of drugs, the German health technology assessment agency found that only about 25% of new drugs are actually better than older drugs. Of course, they're more expensive, but only 25% are better. And yet in the United States, the drugs that aren't better than the older drugs that are available are actually marketed. There's 3 times more money invested in marketing non-superior drugs than superior drugs. So the seesaw is tipped against doctors and patients understanding which drugs are best. That said, if there's an older drug that will do the job, that's tried and true, that we know this, for decades, they've been used and we know what the side effects are. If there's an older drug, people ought to require that there's proof that the new drug is superior to the older therapies before they take a newer therapy. And we've seen many examples of this in the United States. For example, Humira, an arthritis drug, was the best-selling drug in the United States and the world by far for many years. And yet it had never been shown, it was never shown to be superior to so-called triple drug therapy for rheumatoid arthritis, which cost a fraction as much. So people were taking a new drug, a biotech drug, with unknown, uncertain side effects instead of the regimen that was less expensive and had not been shown to be inferior to Humira. So you want to try to establish that. And if you go to your doctor and say, and the doctor prescribes a new drug, and that will happen a lot, you should ask your doctor if there's evidence. 2 questions. One is, if I try lifestyle modification, might that work? Can I try that first? And for some conditions, like prediabetes, for example, lifestyle modification is clearly the superior way to go. But ask your doctor, excuse me, if there's evidence that lifestyle modification will work, and take a try at that. And if you can't modify your lifestyle, and most people don't modify their lifestyle on the first go around, but if you try to modify your lifestyle and you can't, then go back to your doctor and say, I know what you said, I believe what you said is true, but I can't do it. I need help. And get help. Get help from somebody like Catherine, get help from a physical therapist, from a nutritionist, from a health coach, from whoever you can connect with, who can help you reprioritize your life so there's room to live a healthy lifestyle. And if it's a situation for which healthy lifestyle won't help or won't be enough help, then ask if there's evidence that the new drug that the doc may be recommending for you is superior to older drugs. From a cost point of view, that's advantageous to the patient. And from a health point of view, that's often going to be helpful to the patient.
So, Dr. Abramson, I just want to interject. When I have clients who are on medications, there's a couple of websites that I refer people to. rxlist.com. If you go to anywhere in the world, you go to rxlist.com, it will list out the side effects of all your medications. And I feel if you do take medications, you want to be an informed consumer, because many of the side effects many of the symptoms that people have are actually, as you know, Dr. Abramson, actually just symptoms of your drugs. Now, I want to point something out also. In the United States, the average number of prescription medications taken by adult Americans is 4. So the average American is actually on at least 4 drugs, but that varies by age. Adults 40 to 79 take at least 1 prescription drug, and about 1 in 5, 20% of Americans that age take 5 drugs. Ages 60 to 79, lipid lowering drugs such as statins are the most common prescription drug. And adults over 70, 83% of Americans over the age of 70 take at least 1 drug every day. So another big issue is when people are taking more than 1 drug, how do you know how the drugs interact? So I've had clients and they literally the list of medications they take is at least 1 page long.
Right.
Um, and there's a website called ehippocrates.com where you can look up the side effects of when you're taking more than one drug, how all these drugs interact. So, Dr. Abramson, when people are taking more than one medication, how can they tell if the side effects they are experiencing are not the interactions of all their drugs?
The answer is you can't tell. You can be suspicious, and the sources that you've just cited will let people look up the drugs that they're taking and the potential side effects. It doesn't mean there's a causal relationship, but it certainly means that this should be discussed with the doctor. But there's a bigger issue. Let's take this, go a little meta on this issue. I have colleagues in Canada who I've worked with closely over the last 2.5 decades. And there's a different attitude about prescribing in Canada. So there's a word that's very common amongst primary care physicians in Canada. It's called deprescribing. And the doctors feel that their responsibility, like in a yearly physical exam, is to review that drug list and to figure out which drugs got added on that may no longer be needed or that there may not be evidence to support their use from. In the United States, I don't know how it works in the UK, Catherine, but in the United States, there's no such thing as deprescribing. And every doctor that a patient goes to adds on another medicine for their systems. And the medicines get added, and the docs are afraid to take away a medicine because they didn't prescribe it. And if something goes wrong, they fear that it's going to be their responsibility. So what has to happen is the concept of deprescribing has to be legitimized. So doctors and patients can go through this exercise yearly. I think every year when a person goes for their annual physical exam or health review or whatever we call it now, every year people should ask their doctor to review their medication list and ask if there's anything that they can try to decrease the dose on and then stop and see if they feel better in the positive sense or stop feeling side effects. So deprescribing, just having a word for it legitimizes it. And we never use that word in the United States. But deprescribing should be part of every annual medical review.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Abramson, 2 of my 10 books are about how to heal depression naturally without drugs. And working with clients over the past 31 years, I've helped more people heal depression naturally than I can even count. What is your professional opinion of antidepressants? Because, like you said, a lot of people get on antidepressants and they're on them for decades.
And they're hard to get off. Once you're on them, it can be difficult to get off. So think about starting them. My impression about antidepressants is the same as all the other drugs. The drug companies found a target to treat serotonin reuptake in the brain. They found that target and they found drugs that could modify the metabolism of serotonin in the brain. And they declared that they had found the core issue, the fundamental issue causing depression. There's not evidence that serotonin is related to depression, and there's not evidence that blocking serotonin reuptake improves, that's the mechanism by which depression is improved. The truth about the antidepressants is that for major depression, and major depression means you're lying in bed and can't get out of bed, you can't perform your normal functions, you can't perform your job or your family responsibilities. Major depression is a terrible illness. And for people with major depression, about 1 out of 4 people who are treated with antidepressants will get better because they were treated with an antidepressant. And David Healy, who's a brilliant psychiatrist in Wales, who's as an astute a pharmacritic as I know, says that when he sees a patient as a psychiatrist with major depression, that he will use antidepressants. He will try antidepressants because a 1 out of 4 chance of helping them is, you wouldn't want to forego that opportunity to help somebody step out of this deep pit of despair more quickly. That said, major depression is a very small percentage of the medical conditions for which antidepressants are used. Minor depression means that we feel blue more often than we would like to during the course of the day or the week or the month. And if there were a way to step out of that, that would be a good thing. And the docs believe that treating those people with an antidepressant will help them. And that's how people get started on antidepressants. The truth is that there's not statistically significant evidence that antidepressants help people who have less than major debilitating depression. And it's a way for doctors to feel good that they think they're helping their patients. And it's a way for patients to feel good to think that they don't have to make major changes in their life and they can get over the depression and continue to live the way they're living. The truth is that the vast majority of those folks need what you are recommending. There are reasons in their life that they're depressed. The reasons may be current relationship issues, they may be financial and job issues, they may be deeply embedded psychohistorical issues from their childhood. There are infinite number of causes for people to feel less happy about their lives than they would like to. And the vast majority of those causes are not medical. So that helping people to look at how their lives are going, what baggage they're carrying forward that may be compromising their enjoyment of life, all those issues, that's where to look. But for minor depression, antidepressants have not been shown to provide a significant benefit. And I want to say that there's not evidence that serotonin levels correlate with depression, but there is evidence that when you alter the brain's metabolism of serotonin and the brain gets to a new steady state with more serotonin between the neuronal synapses, the brain is then addicted to those levels of serotonin. And you have to decrease the dose very carefully. And some people who are on, say, 25 milligrams of an antidepressant, who really want to get off them and are meticulous, some of those folks find that they have to take a minuscule dose each day, or those symptoms of drug withdrawal recur. So even 2 milligrams, some folks get down to 2 milligrams from 25 milligrams a day, and 2 milligrams a day, which is very unlikely to do them harm. They need that in order to keep their balance. And okay, so the drug created a dependency and we can't undo that completely, and that's fine. But going from 25 milligrams to 2 milligrams is going to get rid of a whole lot of the side effects that people experience. One of which, this is important, one of which is the drugs decrease libido, decrease sexual feelings, positive sexual feelings. And of course, decreased sexual feelings can harm a relationship and be the cause of depression, not the result of depression. So review with your docs if you need those drugs. Don't stop them willy-nilly, because that's an abrupt jolt to your brain. You need to be in contact with, I would recommend a physician. Catherine, you may think that's a little paternalistic, but I think a doctor, an MD or a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, ought to be seeing you regularly as you taper down your dose to make sure that there aren't signs that you're having withdrawal symptoms that could be dangerous, and to go back up a little bit and to go down slower next time. So do not stop your antidepressants on your own because you hear that they're not significantly beneficial, because your brain now counts on them, and you got to treat your brain gently to get off them.
I completely 100% agree with everything that you've just said, Dr. Abramson. And I do medical intuitive readings for a healing center in Costa Rica, and people come from all over the world to heal all kinds of various serious challenges. And the gentleman that I work with, he said that antidepressants are some of the most difficult medications to get off. So,
Yes.
yeah, and I agree with you have to go super slow, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Difficult and dangerous and
and,
dangerous.
and look at
Yes.
what else does my brain need, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
in natural healing, there's a lot of wonderful amino acids and supplements that you can use to boost up your brain chemistry naturally. Now, with that, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 best-selling author. We're here with Dr. John Abramson, author of Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Repair It. We'll be right back. Dr. John Abramson, your book, Sickening, has an entire chapter about statin medications, which are prescribed for so-called high cholesterol. Bottom line, what do you want people to understand about statins?
The bottom line is number one, the drug companies have done all the studies, and the drug companies have played a major role in all the guidelines. So the best information we have, and I've been in this data for 20 years, 25 years, the best information we have is that if you have heart disease, if you currently have heart disease, and you take a statin, you, excuse me, you have a 1 out of 33 chance of having that statin prevent you from having another cardiovascular event. If you take a statin for 5 years, if you treat 33 people with a statin for 5 years, one person will not have a cardiovascular event because they took the statin. The other 32 people won't have a benefit from the statin and will have the potential of having side effects. And we don't even know what the frequency of side effects is because the drug companies who did the studies didn't measure the frequency of side effects because there was no advantage to them to measure the frequency of side effects. So it's called number needed to treat. You have a 1 out of 33 chance of not having a cardiovascular event if you take a statin, if you have heart disease, and you have about a 1 out of 80 chance of not dying if you take a statin for 5 years. Now, most doctors feel that all things equal, it's better to have the advantage, small though it be, of statins on your side. So you may be the 1 out of 33 or 1 out of 80 people who benefits. And as a family doc, I knew those numbers, and I would tell those numbers to people. And I think the guidelines that say you should be on a statin or you shouldn't be on a statin are nonsensical. What the doctor should do is explain these numbers to the patient and let the patient decide whether they want to take the chance or not. It's not for the doctor to decide what's best for the patient, it's for the patient. So, but understand that the chance of being helped is small, and the chance of being helped by engaging in a regular exercise routine and eating a healthy diet and quitting smoking and not drinking in excess and having peaceful family relationships, that's a certainty. That will certainly improve the quality of your life and will almost certainly decrease your risk of having another cardiovascular event more than taking a statin. Now, that said, there's nothing against doing both of those things, taking a statin and attending maximally to lifestyle changes. Now, that's for people who already have heart disease. For people who don't have heart disease, There is not a statistically significant reduction in the risk of dying of cardiovascular disease. It doesn't exist despite all the between about 120,000, 150,000 people who have been in controlled trials on statins who don't have heart disease. The statins do not significantly reduce your risk of dying of cardiovascular disease. They do significantly or almost significantly reduce your risk of having a cardiovascular event. But between 100 and 140 people need to take, without heart disease or other exceptional risks like diabetes, 100 and 140 people have to take statins for 5 years in order to prevent one cardiovascular episode. So the odds of benefiting if you don't have heart disease are much smaller. And again, if you're worried about heart disease, I would say to everybody, and I should have started my answer with this, if you go to your doctor and say, doctor, should I be taking a statin to prevent heart disease? You're asking the wrong question. You're falling into the drug company's marketing ploy. The question isn't, should I take a statin? The question isn't, how low should my cholesterol be? The question is, doctor, I'm worried about having heart disease. What can I do to prevent it? Don't go to drugs immediately, because about 80% of heart disease is caused, explained, the result of poor lifestyle habits. So if you're worried about having a heart attack, don't think that taking a statin is going to protect you. It might, the odds are low, but it might protect you. But what has 4 times more chance of protecting you is to take control of your own lifestyle. And again, I can't say this enough. I was a family doc on the front lines. I know how hard it is for people to change. And I would have this discussion multiple times a day with people. And when I suggested that lifestyle change was important for them, I would always make a 1-month follow-up visit. And that 1-month follow-up visit wasn't to see whether they had been able to make the changes, because about 95% of people aren't able to make those changes first time around. But the reason for that 1-month visit was to talk to them about why they failed. What are the impediments to adopting a healthy lifestyle? And what kind of help can we bring in for them to overcome the resistance to making those healthy changes? Maybe they're simple, they get a babysitter, maybe they're complicated, my marriage is on the rocks, maybe they're financial, maybe they're socioeconomic, but whatever it is, I think the doctor's responsibility is to look at the social dynamics that go around preventing adopting a healthy lifestyle. And if we scientists, medical scientists, were honest about what we're doing, we would say that's 4 times more important than whether you should take a statin or not. So let's spend 4 times more of our precious time together talking about how you can decrease your own risk of a heart attack, because statins will play a very small role in that.
Great information. Final question, Dr. John Abramson, how can consumers protect themselves against the drug companies?
It's a very hard question. That is why I wrote Sickening. I know what's going on. I spent 12, 15 years in litigation. I was involved in maybe 20 cases. I consulted to the the FBI and the Department of Justice on what turned into the largest criminal fine in US history. I know what's going on out there. We've got to have a general predisposition to feel that at least 80% of our health is the result of how we are living our lives. We've got to take responsibility for that. And I can explain to you how the drug companies got in this position, why the doctors believe that non-transparent, the drug companies don't make the results of their data available for independent analysis. I can explain to you all those things about why this situation exists. But the bottom line is simple. You will do the most for your health if you adopt a healthy lifestyle and if you can't get help.
Great information. You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. Our guest today has been Dr. John Abramson, Harvard educated medical doctor, family doctor, teacher at Harvard Medical School, and author of Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Repair It. So remember that natural healing actually works and that your lifestyle is actually the most important factor that's going to move the needle to improving your overall well-being. And that's why I run the Natural Healing Show, because this stuff actually works. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.